Thank you everyone so much for coming, first of all. Really appreciate it. Literary wise, thank you. Well, literary wise, we had the Emirates Literature Festival last 2 weeks, right? And that kept me really busy because the theme this year was on journeys, and there were historians, there were business writers, and I was very fortunate to be able to host a couple of the sessions. So it was a really, really good 2 weeks.
I know that's something that you're very, very interested in, is history, and can you just talk to us a bit about your interest in history in literature, please?
Yeah, well, history, what that does is that it's an excellent repository or store for a writer to delve into. Let me give you an example. So in the 11th century, there were this group of people called the Volga Vikings, right? Now, people who come from the UK know the Vikings because they marauded Britain, but they were actually a minority. Most of the Vikings actually went the other way. They went east to down the river Volga, and they ended up in Kiev. And Kiev is, and they ended up being called the Rus, right? And people speculate that Russia, the name Russia, comes from there. But before they got to Kiev, they encountered a number of trading routes and Arab traders, and they eventually wound their way down into Baghdad. Now, Baghdad, or Baghdad of the 11th century, had 1 million people in it. It was probably the greatest city in the world at the time. So these Volga Vikings became traders and started trading with the Arabs. And what the Arabs then did, they actually went up north, and probably the most famous one was a gentleman called Ahmad ibn Fadlan. And he actually learnt the language of the Vikings, he learnt their customs, and until today, his is the only surviving account of a Viking burial at sea, in terms of full graphic detail of a chieftain being buried. Now, that makes a great story, and what you'll find is that there's more written in Arabic about the Vikings than there is in any other language, because they had so much interaction. So what one of the very famous novelists of the 20th century, Michael Crichton, did, you know him because he wrote Jurassic Park. Michael Crichton actually wrote a book called Eaters of the Dead, which was a fictionalized account of Ahmad ibn Fadlan and his journey to the north. So what I try and do is, in my stories, is also introduce elements from Mesopotamia, from Greece, from the Indus Valley, from Anatolia. And I think that history is essentially an excellent repository.
Well, I think that's really, really interesting. I didn't know that until this afternoon. I was having a chat with Rayhan about this, and I thought that was absolutely fascinating. And you are very interested in heroic tales of courage and valour. Why do you think that they're good stories for a teen audience to be reading?
Yeah, I think tales of heroism is that I always believe that when you read a heroic kind of tale, it actually inspires the heroic potential within all of us, really. You feel much more courageous, you feel that you could be a lot more compassionate, and you could be a lot more moderate as well with people. And I know that when I was young and I was reading books like Sherlock Holmes, or reading about the swashbuckling tales of Zorro, or even reading comic books like Batman, I actually was very inspired, and I think that really helped me develop a very kind of positive outlook to life, which has really, really helped. So I think for a younger audience, going to that kind of source material is really, really helpful.
So why do you think young people should be, why do you think young people should be reading fantasy?
Well, fantasy, I think, is very useful for young people to read, and also sci-fi, because what they do, they create like a platform to talk about really very maybe difficult issues, so maybe talking about racism or gender equality or something like that. And in a fantastical world, you're not pointing the finger at anyone, so the writer can actually express an opinion, and no one should really take it, they shouldn't be hurt by it, because it's a fantastical world. So if you look at that, and also if you look at the fact that generally reading is a very personal experience. It's kind of you and the words. And in that moment, you're very isolated, okay? So I think when you read about people who are very different from you, that creates great potential for empathy. You really can feel very empathetic towards someone else who is very different from you as well. So I find that in that moment, you have that great potential there.
Now, I'm quite interested in your development as a writer and teacher head on here, and your writing education. Can you talk to us a bit about how your writing has moved and developed?
Sure. So I think, look, any kind of, especially with fantasy writing, there are a couple of tools or techniques that the fantasy writer has. So you have to kind of think about, because every writer is trying to get an emotional response from the reader. I'm trying to make my reader feel either fear, or anger, or love, or hurt, whatever it might be. And in the fantasy genre, there are kind of three tools that we have. You create the right setting for the for the story. When is it set? Where is it set? Is there a war going on? What's happening, right? That's the setting, it's the world building. You then have the characters. Who are the characters? What are their challenges? What do they look like? Who are the antagonists? Who are the protagonists? Who are they like really inside? So their real motivations. And then you've got the plot. Okay, so what's happening? So A has caused B, and then something else led to C, and so on. So in a fantasy kind of novel, you have to think about the setting, the characters, and the plot. And then how do I put conflict into my setting? How do I put conflict into my characters? And how do I put conflict into my plot as well? And that then creates an emotional response in the reader. And I think when I started writing, I was writing very much like a business book. So it was very passive, it wasn't active voice. I think just generally through experience and practice, you then start to understand those techniques.
I think I'd like to know more about this, and as mentioned, I do stuff at the Comic-Con. I've been doing that for a few years. I understand that you are doing a workshop at the Comic-Con this year.
Yeah, if anyone's actually interested, I'm running a masterclass at the Comic-Con on this very subject, how to actually create fantastical worlds. So Comic-Con is, I think...
the 6th to 8th of April.
6th to 8th of April, I think, yeah.
Okay, and I was particularly interested in your development of the female characters, because you've got some very strong female characters in Last of the Tasburai. I'm just interested to see how they develop into the next novel, and particularly Princess Elsa. She seems like the pretty princess character, I have to say. Appropriate, but development-wise?
Well, I think I've always, so in the book there are 5 main protagonists, and 3 are female characters. And in my experience in life, women always get the job done, and they actually deliver.
Yep.
And men talk a lot, and they procrastinate. So I thought, if I'm going to write a fantasy novel, I better have strong female leads as well.
Good plan.
Yeah. And I think one of the challenges in many organisations and government really is the fact that there aren't enough women at the top. Because if there were enough women at the top of organisations, I think there would be much more sustainable organisations, and they wouldn't be ones that boom and bust all the time. So that's been my experience. That's why I put that.
I'm really hoping somebody's going to be tweeting that out.
So that's been my experience. Thank you. So in terms of Princess Elsa, well, I think she, of all the protagonists in the first book, she was probably the one that people didn't like very much. She was spoiled. But I am quietly confident that by the end of book 3, she'll be the one that everyone likes the most.
Well, I'm looking forward to that. I'd like to open up to the floor. Has anybody got any questions for Rayhan? Come on, don't be shy.
Predictably. Can everybody hear me at the back?
Teacher voice.
Teacher voice, married to a teacher. I've got teacher partner ears.
Very good.
So, in book 1, the main protagonist, it's clear, They believe in what they're doing, they believe it's right, they believe it's for the betterment of the society they either want to build or maintain. What we didn't get in book one was the journey, you used the word journey, that brought them to those positions, those beliefs. Are we going to see some of those beliefs come to the fore and why they adopted those positions?
That's an excellent question, Peter, thank you. So I think probably the main protagonist is Suri Yi, who was in the front of the first book. And you'll be very happy to know that the very first chapter of the new book sheds a lot of light as to how she got to that position. So yes, I think when you write one of these kind of fantasy novels, you have to bleed in the information gradually. Otherwise, it's just like an information dump, and it's kind of like boring for people to read. So yes, you will have that.
Do we get the backstory on the bad guy from there?
And you get the backstory on the bad guy as well. That's right.
I'm going to buy one. Thank you.
Good.
Can we have some more questions?
Can I make an observation?
Okay.
At the end.
Maybe at the back.
Yeah, if I understand correctly, Brad, you actually have a day job as well, and you have a family, and I'm sure you have other things that keep you busy. How do you find the time for all of this and for writing and for channeling your creative energy?
So how do I find time? Okay. Well, I think look, I take the view that every step you take in life is one step closer to your death. Now that shouldn't sound morbid, because what it should do, actually it should give you a sense of urgency to use your time effectively, right? So that's kind of my mental approach to it. Now as to how I actually implement it, well, what I try and do is I wake up very early normally and get cracking. So you've got to write about 1,000 words every day when you're writing. So I tend to do that in the morning before I start work. So it's just balancing that and trying not to, be hooked to Netflix or something for sometimes it's fine, but try not to get hooked to that.
And do your children ask you for advice, or do you ask them for advice?
Yeah, that's a difficult one actually. So they do sometimes come and say, "Oh, could you have a look at this kind of essay?" But they tend not to get involved in the book too much. No.
How well do you structure them in advance? Do you know when you sit down to start writing a book, do you know how it's going to end? Does it follow your structure very rigidly? Or?
Yeah, in terms of how I structure the book, yes, definitely. You've got to have an end in mind. Definitely got to think about how is it going to end. But what I tend to do is that I'll plan for a book. So say there's about 60 chapters in this one. I'll actually plan all the chapters out, put them on a piece of paper, put them on the floor, quite literally put them on the floor, so I can then see, how is the actual story flowing? Okay, and it's a bit boring there, maybe I need to kill someone, or maybe, I need to do something here. Yeah, just to keep it moving, right? Because the reader is trusting their time with me as a writer. So I've got to make it breathless. If it's not breathless, no one's going to read it. So that's why that just helps you calibrate the story, when you can kind of see the whole thing together. That's how I tend to do it.
Sorry, the second question, if I may. How much time between structuring it, thinking how it's going to be, and actually sitting and writing?
So how much time between structuring and actually sitting and writing? So on the first book, which took actually 4 years to write, I spent half the time planning and I spent half the time writing. In the second book now, which took 18 months to write, I took about 6 months planning and about 12 months writing. So I would say probably between 20% to 30% of your time has to be planning.
When you are constructing your book, do you keep in mind what a lot of modern authors have in mind? And think about it in terms of how to create imagery for the reader, because a lot of writers write in a very filmic sort of way now. So the crossover between the novel and the film is actually a lot easier. Do you ever think about how this would look if it were on screen?
Oh, great! Yeah, every writer would love their work to be on screen, probably. So you do, in terms of visualization, looking at visually how does this actually feel. So if you're writing a fight sequence and it's raining and they're on the edge of a mountain and the wind is blowing, visually what does that look like? Or if it's a very soft scene and someone's reading a piece of poetry, you know, is there water dropping in the background? What's the scent of the roses on the table? You know, what are they thinking? So yes, definitely, you have to visualize the words. Well, I certainly do, and I think that helps actually then get them down on paper.
And how would you feel if some teacher came along and said, right, we're studying your book at school?
Oh, well, please, if you'd like to do that, I think that would be fantastic. Actually, there was a teacher, a head teacher from one of the schools. He's a history teacher, and he wrote to me and said, you know, I got my class to read your book because of the historical references in there.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. Question here.
Oh, we've got another question over here. Please.
So, what elements do you use to inspire yourself, like music, or you need certain settings, silence, or it's just in your head? You can create the environment where you need external elements to help you.
Yeah, in terms of inspiration, I think like everyone, you know, inspired by a number of different things, but I'm also really inspired by other good writers. And you know what I tend to do is I tend to read a work of fiction, and then I read a work of non-fiction together. So for example, I'll read someone like Brandon Sanderson, who writes a great fantasy like Mistborn and Stormlight, and he uses a lot of history and philosophy and anthropology in his books. And after that, I'll read a work of non-fiction, something like The Silk Roads by Peter Frankopan, which is a story about the Silk Roads, okay? And what that does is, once I've read non-fiction and fiction together, it just gives me an extra view on the fiction I read. Or I'll read something like Elif Shafak's The 40 Rules of Love, which is a story about the poet Rumi. And essentially it's a story about love and compassion. And after that, I'll read something like Karen Armstrong's The 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life. Because then what I'm getting, I'm actually then, by reading the non-fiction, I'm getting a lot more depth and understanding of the fiction that I just read. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I think that's quite inspirational.
Do we have any more questions?
You've got some complex characters. Based on anyone you know?
Did I base the complex characters on anyone I know? Well, I think, like everyone there, you know, you journey through life and you meet all types of people. So certainly there are elements from a number of different people I've met who are probably in the book as well, yes. But I can't name them, Roger, I can't name them. How do I explore?
No, how did you discover?
Oh, how did I discover? Yeah, how did I discover my passion for writing? Well, I was always interested in writing from a very young age, and like many people, I had a great teacher, English teacher, who was actually over from America, and she was, our teacher went there, and she came over from Beverly Hills, and so from California, and she was very inspirational and really encouraged me to write. And I wrote this story about this friend of mine who was left by himself at home, and these burglars were trying to get into the house, and he was like preventing them getting in and building these traps and all kinds of things. And she really encouraged me to develop the story. And I remember as a 9-year-old writing about 15 pages with pictures and everything else, and she gave me a really good grade. But since she was from Beverly Hills and Hollywood, I think that became the script for Home Alone. But I can't, you know, I'm not 100% sure, but I think that's what happened. So I've always been very inspired from a young age for writing, and then, you know, just keeping that passion up, really.
Do you have any more? Well, I think...
Can I make a comment?
Oh, yeah.
All the photographs that are being taken with a fantastic backdrop of the two book covers. Those book covers are spectacular. The images are very brooding. When it comes to book 3, I'm available. Book early.
So we'll have to have you as like the mystic, the wandering mystic, you know, the sensei, the godfather, right?
Okay, stop. I was joking.
One question. I mean, when you are putting the history line, because you said that this is based on some true historical events, you put your fiction onto this. And then you said that you still do write this without offending any party, because history is perspective as such. Is it sort of like, where do you get your perspective from? Is from which side do you read the story when it comes to history?
So how do I interpret the historical events in the story? So what I tend to do is, in terms of when it comes to history, it's using history for character names, names of like weapons, names of places, things like that. But when it comes to actually topics that I'm discussing, I'll try and cover things which are kind of contemporary and happening now as well. So maybe it's something to do with, you know, how the world is becoming very polarized. But a lot of people in the world don't want the world to become polarized because we can see the dangers of that. So I think those are themes which are in history, but they're also contemporary and they're now. And I think those kind of books will resonate a lot more with readers when they can actually see real issues being covered as well.
Well, thank you very much, Rohan. I think we're just about getting to the end here, but lady over there.
So at the end of the first book, or actually in the first book, you hinted at a romance between, well, Captain Picard and Princess Elsa. Are you gonna get married in the spirit of the Tasburai?
Are you kidding? No. Princess Elsa cannot marry Captain Picard. Captain Picard can't marry Princess Elsa.
Why not?
Well, for what? He said she's spoiled, right? So she's spoiled, right? And he's an intelligent guy. He needs someone who's like Ilva, right? An honest young.
Well,
So that's agreed.
She's marrying Ilva, right? He's marrying Ilva.
No, I don't want to hear about it. No, I don't want to hear about it. I think Captain Picard and Princess Elsa, they belong to each other, you know? They're like Dubai and Sheikh Zayed Road. Or my morning toast and Nutella. You know? They have to be together. Please tell me they're going to be together.
They're not together, right?
well, I'm kind of working on it. We'll have to see. Have to wait for book 2.
I didn't realise there was such a complex love triangle in the middle of the story.
Well, I wouldn't quite call it a rom-com, yeah, but there is something there.
Perhaps we can just have one last question.
Yeah, so in Last of the Tasburai, page 122, you write, and I quote, the men, though Ricard wasn't quite sure he could call them men, had enormous foreheads, deep-set eyes, and wolfish detention. They were also very big. Their fingers were thick and their boots curled upwards like talons. You're obviously describing the Zetin there. I was wondering if you could tell me, what are the anthropological and etymological references you use to come up with these creations, these monsters?
Who cares about the ET terrestrial and blah, blah, blah? You know, they're great monsters, and I want to see more of them in screen.
Yep, me too. But I think that the Zetin are based on the Old English units of the Etin, which, excellent. So if that's the case, then I don't think that you've quite illustrated them properly. I think they could have a more accurate depiction.
If the guy agreed, it's fiction, that's how fiction works. He can make things up if he wants to.
Yeah, but I think it would be more accurate and believable if he personified the Etin better, more accurately, right? So I actually wrote a paper on the topic, which I would like to give you, and it's all about how you can fix this in book 3.
Can I see that?
Sure, if you'd like, I think you'll find that I'm right.
Oh, sure. I'm sure I would.
I already emailed it to him.
Just make sure that Princess Elsa and Captain Rickard get together.
Well, let me just check. Let me just check in the book. One second.
Forget it. Just, I'll do it.
Oh, okay. Okay.
What? What? No.
Dead? Dead? Dead?
Why?
How could you? How could you? How could you? No! How could you?
We're warriors with a purpose. Now we escort hecklers. Very good.
having those Tasburai warriors around. Hey, Rayhan. And I'm actually looking forward to you emailing that to me about the Etin and the Zetin and the Etin. But can you just tell me who gets married?
You're going to have to read the book, Mel. I'm sorry, you know.
Well, on that note, we'd just like to say thank you very much to Kinokuniya and to Mr. Miras, who's organised all this for us today, to our Tasburai warriors, Layla and Giorgio, and our actors, Lamia and Phil. They were actors. Ada, who designed the costumes. And thank you so much, all of you, for coming. And here's the bit that you've been waiting for, the books and photographs with the Tasburai warriors. So thank you so much, and thank you very much.